As I said, Sunday marked President Obama's 5th speech, 5 times already that he has addressed the nation after a mass shooting. At a memorial service for the 12 people killed during last week's Navy Yard shooting, the president honored the lost while scolding Washington for its inaction on gun reform.
Once more, our hearts are broken. Once more, we ask why. And I'm here today to say that there is nothing routine about this tragedy. There's nothing routine about your loss. It ought to be a shock to all of us, as a nation and as a people. It ought to obsess us. It ought to lead to some sort of transformation. That's what happened in other countries when they experienced similar tragedies. In the United Kingdom, in Australia, when just a single mass shooting occurred in those countries, they understood that there was nothing ordinary about this kind of carnage. They endured great heartbreak, but they also mobilized and they changed. And mass shootings became a great rarity. And yet here in the United States, nothing happens. Sometimes I fear there's a creeping resignation that these tragedies are just somehow the way it is, that this is somehow the new normal. We can't accept this. There is nothing normal about innocent men and women being gunned down where they work. There's nothing normal about our children being gunned down in their classrooms. There's nothing normal about children dying in our streets from stray bullets. No other advanced nation endures this kind of violence. None.
And while the president called more gun control for the NRA, or called for more gun control, the NRA, they called, as you'd expect, for more guns.
This is a tragedy that should not have happened, a memorial service that should not be taking place, and victims that should not be victims. The problem is there weren't enough good guys with guns.
Heard that one before. The head of the NRA, they're vowing to continue to oppose any gun control efforts proposed by the president. So now the Navy Yard shooting, it has reignited the debate over gun control in this country, a debate that was last had in earnest after Newtown. Andrew, he went out to Newtown today to see how local gun control advocates are reacting to yet again another mass shooting.
Sad, but unfortunately not surprised, Rich. Perhaps the best way to describe the reaction in Newtown. I sat down this morning with Poe Murray. She's a Newtown mother, and since December, she's a co-founder and vice president of the Newtown Action Alliance. That's a group dedicated to changing the law and changing minds when it comes to guns and gun safety in this country. We spoke just a stone's throw from Sandy Hook Elementary School and from the home where the Newtown gunman lived and began his rampage just 9 months ago.
You have probably heard about the word, the new normal. I think that definitely defines how we're doing here in Newtown. I think everyone is in a different place. There are good days and bad days, and there are days that we just, go on and hoping that it'll get better.
What's it like in Newtown when a day like what we had last Monday with the shooting at the Navy Yard in Washington happens? How does that reverberate in Newtown?
Well, it's, our hearts are broken all over again when something like that happens. And, tragically, since Congress hasn't done anything since what happened here in Newtown, that it's going to happen again and again in other communities. And, we are so sorry for what happened down in the Navy Yard, and our deepest condolences go to those families down there.
I'm sure it's an everyday thing in Newtown, something that people think about every single day. The rest of the country seems to only pick up on it when these major events happen, when there is a Newtown or an Aurora or a Navy Yard. But it happens 100 times a day in this country. Why do you think people seem to lose focus on gun issues in between these horrific events?
I hope that people didn't lose focus. I mean, what happened in Newtown is probably the most horrific tragedies that has happened to America. And it's something that happened to everybody in America, not just the people in Newtown. Okay, so I hope that they don't lose focus. I know that in many communities across the country, there are grassroots groups that have formed after what happened in Newtown. You know, many of us who didn't pay a lot of attention to gun violence are now paying attention. But, you know, you're right. I think there are a lot of people that are not paying attention, and we need them to. We need their help.
What was your reaction once the push in the springtime for gun control in Washington failed? Even with something like background checks, where 90% of Americans say they want background checks, and it never went anywhere in Congress.
I mean, obviously, we're all very disappointed, and you know, we're not going to give up, though. We're going to continue to work hard to push for safe gun laws and cultural change, because something has to happen.
We saw you and other parents from Newtown in the springtime in Washington knocking on doors, going door to door from Senate and House offices. We saw it again last week. We've seen it a few times in between. Just, you know, another focus in Washington. Is it difficult to do that, to keep going to the same people again and again and saying, when are we going to see some changes?
It's extremely difficult. You know, last week we had 45 meetings set up with the various congressional leaders. 11 of those were with actually the real, you know, the representatives. So it is challenging because we want to meet with the representatives directly and tell them our stories of grief and hope that they'll, you know, will change their heart, and hopefully that will change their mind. So it is challenging and it's emotionally draining for us.
Do you ever hear from any of these lawmakers, especially, and I don't want you to name names, but especially on the Republican or pro-gun side, who say, if there was the political room for me to do something here, I would, but I can't do it because I'll lose my job. Do you ever get any sense of that?
They're not that honest and frank. Most of the people that we meet with basically tell us that it's really not a background check issue, it's a mental illness issue, or the background check bill that was presented, it doesn't do enough, or it does it does too much. So there are usually excuses, but they're not that frank about why they're not going to, you know, vote for a background check.
You know, just hearing you say it, boy, this doesn't go far enough, or this goes too far. My first thought is, well, yeah, but a little goes a long. Why not take one small step if you can't go all the way? How does your head not explode when you're hearing this from these lawmakers?
It is very frustrating to be in these meetings. You know, often it's meetings with their staff members, and you know, they're very empathetic. I mean, you know, some of them shed tears, and we appreciate that. But really, tears and vigils are not enough anymore.
I want to. President Obama at the memorial service for the Navy Yard victims this weekend said he thought that there was a creeping resignation, was his quote, in America about the inevitability of gun violence.
It happens so often, gun violence in this country, that I think the word new normal was referenced to that again. And I just hope that people do not get complacent about gun violence in this country. And you know, they step up like we have in our community, and Moms Demand Action and other organizations from across the country that have sprung up. I hope that they join these groups and really rally so that it is not the new normal. We are going to come back to Washington, D.C. over and over until there are changes made to the gun safety laws.
Right now, the Newtown Action Alliance is taking a one-step-at-a-time approach to gun safety laws, focusing right now entirely on background checks, and once that becomes law, they'll move on to other low-controversy, common-sense solutions. And this quick reminder, you can find the full unedited interview with Poe Murray, as well as our entire RFL interview collection on our YouTube page. Just search YouTube for Richard French for a listing. Rich?
Do you get the impression, Andrew, that she thinks at the end of the day anything will change? I mean, she made it clear that she's going to keep going back with the other Newtown families to press the case. Do they see light at the end of the tunnel? Because right now it's hard to see it.
I don't know if they see it immediately in front of them, but they do believe that this process will result in changes. And right now, again, all they're fighting for are background checks. They think that's coming, and they think the more that they press Washington, the more that it continues to get into the news, and it'll change people's minds beyond Washington. And also, the political structures are being built as well. She thinks that there's the beginning of a counter to the NRA. There's the beginnings. We're starting to see the seedlings of organizations that will support candidates who stand up to the gun lobby, and also, you know, otherwise pro-gun legislators from pro-gun areas who make the tough vote and say, you know what, enough of this. they're going to have their backs. That's their goal.
Do you guys think, I mean, there's certain issues you can see a velocity to it. Gay rights, after a while, you saw an inevitability that it will happen. It's when, not if, nationally, I think. Do you see it that we're going to see changes in gun laws, that we will see a universal background check? It's when, not if, or you're not so sure?
I'm not so sure, because the same folks who are bringing us the debt crisis and the spending crisis are bringing us a repeal of the Civil Rights Act, bringing us an assistance on the gun stuff.
Repeal of the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, the loss of Section 5.
Voting rights.
That was.
I'm sorry?
Voting Rights Act? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Same thing. I mean, it's under the Civil Rights laws.
Yes.
There's a real populist right-wing reactionary, not conservative movement. As long as that's in place, nothing's going to happen. The politics of that are not people being persuaded about guns. It's about an entirely different attitude, and it's about a two-party system which has collapsed. The Republican Party has collapsed. Until we have a functional Republican Party, none of this happens.
You know, Dominic, I always thought if, God forbid, there was a tragedy where people could see in the victims their own families, some of the opponents, it would change. And you couldn't imagine a more every town community like Newtown, the victims, 20 beautiful children, and 6 heroic educators. And I really thought, and obviously I was proven wrong, that would be the tipping point. That would have to change. But I can only think of one other analogy that the opponents of any kind of background checks would change. And as we saw what was happening in Nairobi today, God forbid a terrorist, a homegrown person that should have been or would have been detectable if they were on a background check, got their guns this way, an enemy of the state, if you will. Maybe the opponents then, who are so easy to give up all kinds of liberties when it comes to NSA and other stuff, they might change under that. Do you see a scenario where the right would get on board with this too because they want to know who these people are?
I pray and hope that you're correct, Richard, but I think I would agree with this, Richard. I'm not so sure, and I know you're a world traveler, but when you get out of New York and northern states and you get to see middle America, I don't know, Richard. I just don't see it. And I have to give Andrew credit because I agree with you. I thought after Newtown there was just no way. But I really believe we're looking at the influence of money in politics, and it's that simple.
Misinformation about what it really would have done. You talk to people about what they would have done, and there still is this core of people who believe, hey, they're kicking down your door in the dead of night to take your guns away. So, okay. When we come back, we're going to come much closer to home here. The return of the Squeegee men. Well, some New York City Republicans say that a Mayor de Blasio is going to bring us back to the old days and the not so good days of the 70s and 80s. Is that an overstatement? Well, we're going to talk more about that in the race for City Hall straight ahead.